Lesson 25, Spinal Cord Organization and Function. In this chapter, in this lesson, we are going to focus on the spinal cord, which is a part of central nervous system. So, the spinal cord is the long tubular organ within the vertebral cavity. It passes through the foramen magnum. That's the point where it starts its journey from the brain. So, through the foramen magnum, and this is the point to note. And then it ends between the first and second lumbar vertebra. So it's a long, elongated structure, measures 17 to 18 inches, and its diameter is between 0.25 to zero point 0.5 inches. Now, functions of the spinal cord. Spinal cord relays and processes information. Think about these two words, relay and process. It is the intermediate structure between body and brain. Okay? It receives outgoing information from brain and sends to the body, and receives incoming information from the body, sends to brain. So between body and brain, it works as a relay station. Second function is to process. It performs some integration and processing. One example is spinal reflexes. Spinal reflexes we'll discuss later on in detail, but remember this can be carried out by spinal cord alone. Brain is not involved in that part. Spinal cord has two areas, gray and white matter, and the gray matter, which is inside, that is the inner part of the spinal cord. It contains neuron cell bodies, dendrites, and unmyelinated axons. This is unlike the brain. Brain has the gray matter outside. In spinal cord, it will be inside. The white matter is outside, so it contains myelinated axon. So that is the difference between white matter and gray matter. Spinal cord is protected by its own meninges called spinal meninges, which is continuous with the meninges of brain. There are three layers: dura mater, arachnoid matter, and pia mater, from outside to inside. Dura, arachnoid, and pia mater. DAP, depth. You see in this picture that shows this dura mater, tough one outside, and then the second layer, arachnoid, the blue color, and the innermost layer completely covering this spinal cord, pia mater. If we take a cross section, this is what we find. Okay. First, take a look at this butterfly-shaped innermost structure. That is the gray matter of spinal cord, where all the cell bodies, dendrites, and unmyelinated nerves are there. And then we see that white area, that is the white matter, myelinated axons. And you see those three areas. The innermost layer of the meninges will be pia mater. Then we have arachnoid matter, and then going outwards is the dura mater. The epidural space is outside the dura mater. You see that fatty layer, yellowish area, that's the epidural. Epi means above. Subdural space, just below dura mater, you see that blue line. And then we have subarachnoid space uh, below the second layer, arachnoid matter. There are some ligaments called denticulate ligaments connecting this spinal cord to the nerves. Spinal dura mater has no periosteal layer. Okay? There's periosteum, that's the covering of the bones. Spinal matter, papilla matter anchors spinal cord in vertebral cavity by denticulate ligaments. There are three spaces here: epidural, subdural, and subarachnoid space. Epidural here is between the dura and the vertebra. I mean, above the dura and below the vertebral foramen, between those two structures. It is filled with veins and adipose tissue to cushion and protect spinal cord. Subdural, only a potential space since dura matter and arachnoid matter stick to one another. It's a very small space. Subarachnoid, below the arachnoid, it is filled with CSF. Keep that in mind. Cerebrospinal fluid, which makes our brain and spinal cord to float. Now, this knowledge we are going to apply for our clinical application. The lumbar puncture during the spinal tap or lumbar puncture, this is what we do. We insert the needle to the subarachnoid space below the arachnoid, right? Where the CSF is. Just if I go back, remember subarachnoid space contains CSF. And if we have to draw the few milliliters of that fluid, say we need to diagnose some diseases like meningitis or some other medical conditions. This is where we tap the needle and collect the CSF from. So remember, this area is called subarachnoid space. Epidural injections are given. That's for the anesthesia. That's in the epidural space. Now, so we know this already that the spinal cord extends from the foramen magnum to the vertebral level between lumbar 1 and 2. It has a narrower posterior median sulcus and wider anterior median fissure. So if you take a look into that, right? Anterior, there will be fissure. Fissure is more indented, more wide, more deep, whereas sulcus will be less indented, less deep. Okay? And at the lower part, lumbar 1 and 2, at that area when the spinal cord actually completes, before that, it makes a conus medullaris, like a cone-shaped structure. So the spinal cord ends at the lumbar 1 and 2 level, where it makes this conus medullaris. And the pia mater from then on, it will form the phylum terminally. So take a look into that. You see that yellow area, the spinal cord is starting from the top, that is the foramen magnum, going through the vertebral canal up to L1 and 2, where it becomes narrow, tapered. That area is called conus medullaris. It looks like a cone. The spinal cord is done here, but the pia mater, the covering of the meninges, the covering of this spinal cord is not done yet. It makes a long, narrow tube, long, narrow structures going downwards. That will be the phylum terminally. Spinal cord has two bulges, cervical and lumbar enlargement. Nerve roots are attached to them. You see here, cervical enlargement here. That is due to many of those nerves coming from that area. Plexus will form. One is the cervical, the other one is lumbar. These are the two of those bulgings. Spinal nerves originate from spinal cord and innervate below head and neck. Posterior and anterior nerve roots of the spinal nerves. The posterior one is sensory. Anterior one is motor. The spinal nerves carry sensory and motor impulses to and from spinal cord. So have a look into this. You see here, this posterior root, that green line, posterior one, it is sensory. So it is getting sensory information from skin, from visceral organs. Those information is passing through this posterior root into the spinal cord, whereas in the anterior root, the motor root is commanding nerves, sending those impulses to lungs, muscles, and other structures. So posterior, sensory, anterior will be motor. Posterior root ganglia, you see that bulge right over there. So ganglia is a collection of cell bodies, the sensory neurons. So this is why that bulging is there, posterior root ganglia. Spinal nerves are held together by connective tissue sheath called epineurium. So epi means above, right? Neurium. So epineurium is the covering of these nerves. Within nerve axons are bundled together as fascicles surrounded by perineurium. So you see here, first the whole nerve, total thing is covered by epineurium. Then if you take every fascicle, bundle up those nerve fibers, that is covered by perineurium. And then each axon within the fascicle is surrounded by endoneurium. So three structures: epineurium, perineurium, endoneurium. Epineurium covers the whole nerve, perineurium covers fascicles, and endoneurium covers each axon. We know already about the uh, conus medullaris. There is another thing to add with that part is the cauda equina, bundle of spinal nerve roots extending from conus medullaris. Take a look into this. At L1 and L2 level, spinal cord is done, making a cone-shaped structure, conus medullaris. But you see, a bundle of those nerves, spinal nerves, are still moving downwards. So these bundle of spinal nerve roots, they are called cauda equina. Cauda equina. Network of networks formed by the spinal nerves are called nerve plexuses. For example, cervical plexus, brachial plexus, lumbar plexus, and sacral plexus. So what is plexus? It's a network formed by spinal nerves. Let's talk about brachial plexus. This is the most important one for now. Um, and what do we find in that uh, nerve plexus? It is formed by five nerves: axillary, radial, musculocutaneous, median, and ulnar. You see in this diagram, those five nerves, they are making a plexus, like a network. So that is called brachial plexus. Similar types of plexuses we find in sacral lumbar areas. Um, so those are different types of plexuses. Now, the next topic is dermatome. Derma, we know dermat means skin. So segmentation of skin based on innervation of spinal nerve. What is that? You see in this colorful picture that every part of the skin, it is connected. It is covered by a spinal nerve. It represents all spinal nerves in that skin. It's called dermatome map, with one exception, which is the first cervical spinal nerve, C1. Except that all spinal nerves are actually covering, actually innervating the segment of skin. Internal spinal cord anatomy. Butterfly-shaped spinal gray matter surrounds white matter. What do we see here? We see this butterfly-shaped gray matter when a cross-section of a spinal cord. And at the center, we see central canal filled with cerebrospinal fluid runs down middle of the cord. Okay, central canal filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Then we have gray commissure. You see the butterfly. If you think about the middle part, on both sides we see the wings, and the wings are connected by this gray commissure. Okay, so just remember, gray commissure is the connection between the butterfly wings. Anterior horn associated with somatic motor function. Posterior horn with both somatic and visceral sensory function. So let's take a look into this first. Anterior horn, you see that the red lines coming from the in front of the spinal cord, that's the anterior horn. So it is associated with the somatic motor function, controlling our muscles and organs. Whereas posterior one associated with both somatic and visceral sensory. This time the posterior one is sensory, right? You see blood vessels or visceral organs and skin. What about the middle one? There is another one called lateral horn, present only from thoracic vertebra to lumbar, has cell bodies for motor control of viscera via autonomic nervous system. So this part is connected to the autonomic nervous system, but we do not find it everywhere. It is present only from T1 to lumbar, I mean thoracic and lumbar area. Spinal white matter function as a relay station. We know that white matter is the myelinated axons. It contains axons of neurons that travel to and from brain. Each region is called funiculus, organized into tracts or columns that ascends or descends spinal cord. So white areas, they have those funiculus, anterior, posterior, and lateral funiculus we find there. And inside those areas, we have the ascending tract going upwards in the posterior column, spinocerebellar tract, anterolateral system. In this picture, you see those ascending tracts. The posterior one, you see the blue color things. Then we have the ascending one, the front, uh, and then the spinocerebellar tract. So these are some tracts going upwards from the spinal cord to the brain, whereas the descending tract is going downwards, corticospinal, reticulospinal, tectospinal, vestibulospinal. So those are the things you see here in red color. They are going downwards. So these are actually the highway of information, highway of nerve impulses that is moving very fast between um, spinal cord and the brain through those tracts, ascending and descending tracts. That is all for this lesson.